personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds, and this is the Data Diva Talks Privacy Podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know right now. I have a special guest on the show, Elliott. He is the Chief Revenue Officer for Canopy Software, and Canopy Software handles data breach response. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Sweet. So this is a super fun episode I think we're going to have for many reasons. First of all, you and I have known each other for, I have to look back many years. And we've sort of crisscrossed in different types of jobs and things that we've done in the past around data. And we've actually had a lot of fun over the years having lunches and having these expansive conversations about everything, right? So
it's kind of funny to record one of them.
It is. Basically, we're just recording our conversation.
Yep.
The thing I really like about you is that you really bring good energy. So you have a lot of energy and a lot of passion about data, right? And sort of data problems. And I feel like when we talk a lot about the future, which is a topic that I'm very interested in. So we talk about sort of what we see happening right now, what we think is going to happen in the future. And you're kind of a Renaissance man where you can talk about almost any type of topic. So it makes it so much fun for me to chat with you.
I appreciate that. Likewise, it's always super fun.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about tell the audience a little bit more about you for anything that I left out, anything that you want to tell us about Canopy data breach response software.
So it's a really interesting space in that, one, it's something that we all know about now because we read about it in the newspapers pretty regularly, from ransomware attacks to state actions, and heck, it even affects our daily life sometimes. And we're getting letters in the mail about it all the time. But what's interesting about it from my perspective is that, one, the quite sensible regulations was really way in front of the technology. Because if you think back like 10 years ago, this was barely a thing, if at all. It wasn't something that people often considered, because I came from the e-discovery space. And I think back in like 2008, when we were really getting started in my world, in the modern world of e-discovery for me, and we were all doing these demos with the Enron data set, and there was just so much PII in that data, and it never occurred to anybody. Credit card numbers, social security numbers, all sorts of personal data that was in there, and just nobody cared. It's not that nobody cared. We didn't even think about it. It wasn't even in the ether. So data breach notification was a space that came from regulations. And at first, people were just using whatever tech they could to do it, because the regulations usually say that if people's PII, their personally identifiable information, is compromised, then you need to assess the data that was compromised, or if data at all is compromised, corporate data, you need to assess it, figure out if there's PII in there, and if so, let those people know so they can take reasonable action. And what people were using was technology mostly designed for either searching or for e-discovery review, because at a really, really high level, data breach response kind of looks a bit like e-discovery, because you're technically processing data, the data that was compromised. You're technically culling it down and reducing the data set, kind of like you do in e-discovery, and then you're reviewing it, and then you're producing something. So like at this really high level, it's the same, but as soon as you get into the weeds, it's like super different. You're processing it really just for the PII, and then when you reduce the size of the data set, you're not reducing by keywords and dates and custodians like in e-discovery. You're really just caring about what has PII in it and whose data is it. And then when you're reviewing it, you're not really bringing legal determinations to the review. You're not looking at a document saying, is it relevant? You're looking at a document saying, is there PII here? And if so, whose is it? So, and you're stitching up and making connections between the data. And then your ultimate deliverable isn't even a document. It's really just a list of people and the PII that was affected. So Canopy is really the first software in the whole world that's focused on that problem, start to finish, from we have a raw data that was compromised to, okay, here's the list of people and the law firms and and insurance companies and corporations cannot decide how they want to handle it and if and who they need to notify. That's what Canopy does. The space is interesting because it's really important, I think, in terms of doing good in the world and letting people know as fast as possible, because there's a huge time constraints that they need to maybe make some changes of their passwords or update their credit cards or whatever it is. But it's also just an incredibly interesting data problem.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. And not all of my audience, quite a few of them aren't in e-discovery at all. So I'll just at a high level, I'll sort of make that parallel with you, which I think is true. So in the e-discovery process, there is kind of a lawsuit or some type of initiating action, right? That
Yep.
starts this whole clock ticking about how data gets collected and exchanged between parties, whoever they are. So whether it's another company or a government or something, there's a process, and then the data gets homogenized in some way, review for legal issues, and then sort of exchanged. So that's kind of e-discovery at a high level. And like you said, when people are thinking about breach response, it sort of feels and sounds like that process, right? Where there's like an incident that happened, correct?
Yep.
There's some fact finding that happens. There is kind of a data exchange, even though it may not be document for document. It's more kind of statistics, right? Or
Yeah, it
more,
really it throws people off because it's that difference between the exchanging documents relevant to litigation versus I just need a list of people and I need to know which of their data was breached so we can let them know. And
right?
it turns out the devil is very much in the details, and those are like radically different endeavors. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
get why people were using e-discovery tech for a while because it's all they had. But
right.
yep,
Right. And we're trying to solve a different type of problem. So that also is a very expensive process, right? Where
it
it really doesn't require, in my opinion, kind of legal knowledge to say I have 100 customers and this is the PII I had about those folks, right?
Yeah, and that's another difference in it is that in e-discovery review, you're literally using attorneys, licensed attorneys who are making a legal determination on the documents. Their job is to like look at a spreadsheet and say yes or no, is this legally relevant to the matter at hand, the litigation, based on my knowledge of the project, of the litigation. Whereas in data breach response, it doesn't have to be a lawyer at all, and it's often not. You're really looking at the data. That same spreadsheet, you might look at and be like, all right, there's a list of like 3,000 people here, and there's a lot of credit card numbers and social security numbers. So I need to somehow like note all of that.
Right.
So that's just I mean, it's not even about the document being relevant or not per
No,
se.
no.
Yeah. So it's just super
Right.
different.
And then also, I feel like in this, the way that you need to collect this data and report on it, you can really bring a lot more technology into it, right?
Yeah, and it's really I mean, for us at 30,000 feet for Canopy, one way to describe us is just like an AI cybersecurity company, because that's ultimately what we're doing is using a whole bunch of AI to bring to bear on this problem. And to your point there, in e-discovery, like machine learning is something that like is this extra thing that maybe happens over there. So like first you process the data, and then if it's like a really big case or a really fast moving case, or if it like has certain dimensions, then you might pay the extra money to use these analytics on it. Whereas in our world, like the machine learning and the AI is like literally part of processing, because every single time, like you just do that as part of the process. It's not some extra thing that happens. It's like the table stakes of the endeavor is to use AI.
Correct. Absolutely. So, one thing I want to bring up, and this is something I do in my work, because I work a lot with early stage and people who are doing emerging technologies and stuff like that. And sometimes when I'm talking to a developer and I tell them we need to have a field to know where people are, so like what country they're in, and in the US, we need to know the state. So if we ever need to report that information, we have it, right? Without them going through other extraneous efforts. And literally, I've had people had their heads spin around uh, once I told them that, because they may not be really thinking about the data in those ways.
Oh, absolutely not. And in the course of business, it's like you don't. everyone in these outside spaces, it's so easy to forget that people using data are just trying to get a job done. The largely and people just don't think about the regulations day in and day out as they're just trying to do whatever their job is. And next thing you know, then they hit a phishing email, and now all of a sudden it's a different endeavor. And unfortunately, we live in a world where it's not even like companies can largely take all the right steps and make all the right precautions and still have compromised situations and still basically get breached. So it's not really, and that's not even anymore like oh, the boogeyman's going to get you. It's more just that's just the way the world works these days.
Yeah, yeah. And then, so one of the reasons, beyond us knowing each other, and I think you're really awesome, that I thought it was really important to have this conversation is because when you hear about breaches in the news, it's sort of, oh my God, this company got breached. And then it's just hair on fire, and then they don't say kind of what happens next. So
Yep.
the what happens next is what you deal with. So let's talk through this
Sure.
scenario, right?
Yep.
So we have a company, let's say it's a mid-sized company, 100 million, dollars revenue or something.
Yep.
Maybe they have operations in the US, but they have customers around the world or whatever, and they have a data breach. What
Yep.
happens next?
So a huge percentage of the time they have cyber breach insurance. Probably 80+% of the time at this point. And essentially the insurer largely drives a lot of the process because they tend to be the kind of hub of everything happening. And plus to the company, essentially their main thrust is they're definitely thinking reputationally, oh, like this is bad, like we don't want our customers' data out there or our employees' data, so let's get our arms around that. But plus that, on top of that, how expensive is this going to be to us? So they contact their insurer. The insurer usually has a several folks that they say that they should talk to, and sometimes some of them are already embedded, like the digital forensic and incident response people. Those are the ones that say, okay, this is the data that was compromised. So they'll like definitively say it was like these 3 email boxes or this file share over here. And then attorneys get involved. And usually, again, oftentimes the insurer, the cyber insurer, will often loop them in, or at least say, hey, select from one of these folks. And they'll say, okay, now we need to, like with the scale that we're talking about here, we need to go deeper and figure out what our notification obligations are. And that's kind of where Canopy, or at least our clients, because we sell to people who then use our software on a project by project basis. But then what they need to do is assess those like 3 mailboxes or that file share, go through it and figure out, okay, what's the PII in here? And oftentimes, I mean, it's very much needles in haystacks every single time. So, and it can vary based on what the nature, whether it's a hospital or some sort of healthcare company or a retail company or just like a company that makes like vitamins or something, just run of the mill stuff, to where is it their client files? Is it HR files? But essentially, once they have that, let's just say the mailboxes, someone will run it through our software, and somebody, usually taking about a day, they'll say, okay, we figured it out of like 500,000 records. Here's the 20,000 that actually have PII in them. And now human beings actually need to go through and like say, okay, is that a social security number? Yes, it is. Does it belong to that person over there? Yes, it does. And our software facilitates all that and makes it really fast and easy. But essentially, people need to go through and validate, yes, here's all the PII and here's who it's related to. And then lawyers are kind of coming in along the way and saying, okay, we're hitting notification thresholds over here. We do need to notify about X and Y and Z. So they're advising every step of the way. And essentially, in a large part too, everyone's trying to keep the one, you have to go really fast. So, because there's like the regulations speak to a speed component. And for instance, in the EU, under GDPR, and in the UK as well, they still follow the GDPR regulations on this post-Brexit. But you only have like 72 hours from the initial incident to notify the regulatory body of the general dimensions of the compromise, which is incredibly fast. And it's so fast, like that I would argue without Canopy, like you could not effectively do that. Like, meaning if you, not that it's not a great regulation, it's good, but this is one of those where the regulations drove the software. But if you had like 500,000 records or a million records and you needed to substantively tell a regulatory body what the nature of a compromise is, without our software, that would be incredibly difficult to do, because it'd probably take you like a couple weeks or whatever. But in large part, I mean, you got to go through all that data and just assign it and get it down to essentially a clean list of here's the individuals, whether it be hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions, and exactly what their PII was breached. And then at the very end of the process, you got to let people know, and that's where we get those letters in the mail. And I kind of went through the whole thing.
You did. So that's cool. So there's actually, it sounds like you have almost like a gamification component here where you're telling where the person, you're serving up information for them to say yes, no, or do some type of validation on a very rapid basis.
It is, yeah, because the PII, the heavy lifting on the PII is really about surfacing. The heavy lifting on the machine learning is queuing up the PII as fast as possible, because you still want human beings to validate it. You
Right.
still want human beings to actually say, yes, this really is PII. Yes, it really does belong to those people. But making that as fast as possible, and also making sure that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like if you
Yeah.
discover someone's PII once, you don't need like 7 other reviewers to keep rediscovering America on that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then two, a lot of companies have duplicative information, which makes it even harder, right? Where you just it just exponentially increases the amount of data that they have to actually look through. Because some of it is duplicative, they only have to really report it once, right?
Yeah, it's really just because if you think about that end goal, if you and we've almost all been that person. I mean, bottom line, I just want to know, like, what, as a human being, what was compromised, like what is potentially out there now, and what's the action I have to take. So it doesn't really matter if you hit my credit card number 17 times. I only really care once. Like, I just let me know. And I'll say, like, one thing that's really interesting, and I wouldn't, and again, like this, one of the things that's most interesting to me about the data breach response space is this really is a space where the regulations drove the technology. The technology very much wasn't there originally. Like you couldn't very effectively do this. And one easy spot is that initial culling and like going from a million documents, which, as you know, like you get a few mailboxes and you're in a million documents very fast in review, just looking through stuff. It goes quickly. So getting from a million records to here's the like 50,000 that actually have PII in them. Before Canopy, what people had to do is like kind of two main ideas. One, they would run search terms, and two, they would run regular expressions, which regular expressions are just kind of simple pattern matches. So like for a phone number, it would just be like the pattern of a phone number, or for a credit card number, the pattern of a credit card. And a lot of PII just doesn't match keyword searches. Like it doesn't politely show up in a keyword search when you're looking for, and frankly, keywords aren't meant to find social security numbers. So looking for the term social security number or SSN, a lot of times a social security number doesn't show up when you've put in those keywords. And kind of conversely, if you just use the simple pattern of a social security number, you hit a ton of stuff that's not that. And then you miss stuff that for whatever reason didn't exactly match the pattern, but still was a social security number somehow. So you end up in this weird scenario where you're kind of over-inclusive and under-inclusive simultaneously. So you're reviewing tons more data than you needed to, but it wasn't all the right data. So that's kind of the worst of all worlds.
Right. And then sort of to your example about someone's credit card showing up 17 times in the data set, you needing to only notify them once or count them once, right?
Yep.
Because regardless of how much data it is, it's still that one person that needs to be notified. So to me, that illustrates the weakness in trying to do it almost like a legal review, right?
Oh, totally. Because if you think about like those legal reviews, they think about deduplication on the document levels. They don't think on the like micro piece of data level. They're not like deduping the idea that we've already reviewed, literally this one little nugget inside of a document, this credit card number. So for them, if an email is literally the same email, like if I send you an email, then if they review my version from the sent box, then we don't need to review your version from the inbox. That all makes sense. But the credit card number could be, it's going to be in wildly different documents. It could be in a spreadsheet in one place, then in some sort of form in 7 other places, and an email over here. And so in a text file, the way it was stored in somebody's, like it's going to be in a lot of different places. So even the entire nature of deduplication just works super different.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't lend itself to this. And then I think trying to do it the other way makes it, exponentially more expensive too and unnecessary.
Yeah. And honestly, so that's like essentially like this was like a really funny one, but we had we don't normally get to talk to the corporate clients because usually it's our clients. Well, it's almost exclusively our clients are the ones engaging with the corporations and or the insurance companies. But for whatever reason, on one of these projects, we ended up hearing from the company itself, and they literally, for them, based on what the initial estimates were, like using the kind of the legal review workflow, it was going to cost them like $3 million more than they ended up spending with Canopy. Like, and that's the sort of thing that like I was like, man, can we put that in a case study? And he was like, nah, we don't want to talk about like how we were breached. Like that's not a great, like it's not our favorite thing. We love that we handled it quickly and we got what needed to happen happened, but it's not a story you get to tell. But I mean, it's just a night and day difference.
So you touch on a point that's extraordinarily important that I would love to chat with you about. And so you probably have some insights that you can share, hopefully. So what's happening in the breach space, and I think this is a reason why cyber criminals are so successful, is that when people are breached, they don't want to share.
It's true.
They don't want to share their learning, the things that they learn. First of all, they don't want people to know that they're breached, right? So, so if someone knows it, then they try to keep it to their chest as much as possible. They aren't very forthcoming about how it happened or how a tactic that was used by a cyber criminal can help other people, right, avoid the same things. And so that benefits criminals because then they can do the same trick on the next person.
100%.
And the next person, right?
Yeah. And weirdly, it's one of these things where too, it's hard to speak out publicly about it because it almost invites litigation because there's like a whole, again, I'll go back to, I would say most of the companies that we end up hearing about that this happens to, like a lot of them are doing all the right things. They're taking the right steps. It's just, it's a very difficult problem to prevent. It's not as if people are just ignoring this problem and ostriching their way and just, it happens and they weren't trying. No, they were trying really hard. There was a lot of people that didn't want this to happen. But then if you surface it, then it invites the idea of, well, if they're talking about it publicly, maybe there should be some sort of class action. Maybe there's more money to be had here. Right. It's a whole separate thing. Yeah. So then people don't benefit from the learning of it all.
That's right. So as a company that does this on a high level, obviously not about particular clients,
sure.
But what trends are you seeing in this after breach space that we may not even be thinking about? I'm sure there are some patterns of things that come up that you may know of just because you work with companies that have these incidents, like at an after incident level. Are you seeing people hair on fire? Are they, do they seem to be sort of adjusting how they operate as a result of this? Or, what are you seeing?
So here's a weird trend that it's even hard to figure out how to talk about, but I guess it's wild how often these projects end up costing almost exactly as much as the breach insurance policy covers. Like that's just a weird trend that we kind of run into. Oh, wow. And it's an incredible coincidence that the cost of the projects are exactly what is covered by insurance. And for us, transparently, Canopy throws a wrench into all that. And that's like one of our biggest challenges is that things get a lot cheaper, and like some people aren't wild about us for that. But
Hmm.
it is a weird trend. And here's the net result of that is breach insurance is going to get even more expensive.
Right.
Like breach insurance cost is going up. Some, if you noticed in the space,
Hmm.
some insurance companies are getting out of it because it is more expensive, and everyone's kind of maximizing to the how much will be paid. And it's a weird like yeah, it's a weird thing because it's still pretty new as a space,
Yeah.
but I don't know. That's a big trend.
Well, I see insurance. So I anticipated, as a lot of people did, that you know the insurance market would tighten up on cyber because there's just so many breaches and so
Yep.
many people having breaches that didn't do kind of the basic stuff, right? So, obviously there are maybe some Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise hanging from the ceiling breach stuff, but that's not really the majority.
I guess like here's another big trend, and this is like the reality, but the vast majority really are just phishing emails, just straight up. It's not the majority of breaches are not a sophisticated like what you read about in the New York Times, where some fancy bomb was planted like digitally, and then like they put it in the parking lot and USBs were picked up and somebody what? No, it's just like somebody got a phishing email that looked like a real email and they clicked on the wrong link, and next thing you know, like they've been hacked. And it's just that simple, and the phishing emails get better and better and better, but that's the majority of it. Like 4 out of 5.
Yeah.
Like maybe more. Like it's just a huge percentage. And that's where like there like there's this balance between, because if you think about it, like people have to be able to use email to do their jobs,
Yeah.
but 4 out of 5, like the email is the number one place where these intrusions are coming from, and it's those links, and you can't just like not allow people to click on links in emails. Like that's not we wouldn't nobody would be able to do business. We can't do
Right.
that. So like, what do you do there?
Right.
And I don't know there's a good solution, and obviously it's just an endless cat and mouse game, and frankly
Yeah.
I don't know that this is ever going to be a definitively solved problem.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel, and maybe I talked to some of my other cyber friends about this as well, but I feel like, but when someone clicks on a phishing email, what happens is the person that sent the link is able to manipulate or take advantage of the permissions that the person has within the
Yep.
organization. So a lot of that to me is about access of the individual. So like in my opinion, again, I need to chat with my cybersecurity friends, but if you click, if let's say a low level employee that doesn't have a ton of access, they click on a phishing email. If they don't have a ton of access, I would think it will be limited in what the cyber criminal could do. So I almost feel like the higher level the person's access, and this can happen a lot of ways. Either the person's
Yep.
like a high level person in the organization, or the person, let's say their access controls, they have more access than they should have. Put it like that.
Yep. And to be fair, even if the only thing person has is access to their own email, like their own email is most of the breaches, like just their own PST, their own like mailbox. And in every single person's mailbox has a shocking amount of PII in it, just from just the course of business. Like a random marketing person, like the marketing coordinator for some random company, has way more PII in their mailbox than you'd expect. Just because doing business, we just throw it off like crazy. We're just interacting with things that it's all reasonable and on the individual basis. But as soon as you get somebody that actually has access to the entire thing in aggregate, then it becomes a bigger problem. And frankly, then it has to be reviewed. And for us, like even if it's like 300,000 records, and then you get it down to like 15,000 that have PII in it, unfortunately, like that 15,000 like matters to the people. To the people whose PII it is, that's an important 15,000.
Right, exactly. Right. If you're the person that's part of the data that got breached, it's pretty important at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I mean, it's a cool like and it's cool to at least be able to help with this. Like that it's something that I'll say this. Like it's something that I feel really good about, like waking up every day and trying to help solve in some way. Like that, it feels good to at least be on that side of it. And I think both of us coming from e-discovery, like that was one of the getting into more like the security and privacy space is like enjoyable in that way, and that you feel really good about it, and that like all and yet a lot of the learnings from e-discovery are still useful over here.
Yeah. You're such a do-gooder, though. I'm a very data person, so I'm zeros and ones all day.
Yeah, to me the glass is like 2/3 full.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think, or what would be your thoughts, or what would you say to a company that hasn't been breached yet, right? They've not experienced breach yet, and then, what types of things that you've experienced that you would advise someone if you could go back in time and tell them something that may help them in the future?
So something that we are starting to see more of, and from the nature of what we do, is companies at least using what we do, instead of it being reactive, it can be proactive. So we have a client that thinks about this as rather than uh, doing it as a breach exercise, they do it as informational about how they're storing data, because obviously they have the places they're supposed to put data. But the problem is that people just do their jobs and they don't really think about the data. So what this organization does is they grab they on a monthly basis, they just kind of take a sample from either a line of business or one of the departments within the company. They sample the data, and they just want to get a look at like what sort of PII is being stored, and are we aware of it? And does it comply with kind of the way we think things are? Or is it duplicative? Meaning, is this same PII live somewhere else where that person could access it too? And they just kind of rinse and repeat on a regular basis. And what they find is that at first, it's a trailing indicator and just kind of a here's what we're doing. But over time, as the line of business leaders and the C-suite understands the risk profile of the company, like, hey, if we did get phished, here's the sorts of things that we could do to button ourselves up, that we'd be in a better spot from a data standpoint. It becomes a leading indicator because people realize, hey, this is duplicative. We do have the same data over there. We don't need this to sit here. We can get rid of this data. And I always thought, like, I'll say, like, I was never a like, personally, and I tried to make it work, but I could never, like, get the information governance dog to hunt personally, meaning, like, the fishing expedition of it, of particularly on the like, hey, you have a bunch of useless data, get rid of it. Like that, because just no one cared and no one would review it. Like that was always my, like, trouble there. And from coming from the e-discovery space is if, hey, think of how much data is useless. I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but whose job is it to, like, review the data? And but when it's like real risk profile stuff, when it's, hey, we actually have PII that does have regulations around it, it's a very different story. And the chief risk officer and the chief privacy officer have just a different view of that.
Yeah, I'm very proactive, so I'm very much into proactive stuff, and probably I'm sure people have heard my rantings and ravings about, legacy data, or data that may have kind of lagging business utility that's in a back room somewhere or in the cloud somewhere that no one cares about. But in a cybersecurity situation, that data, it may not be a huge asset to the company at the moment, but it may be a huge risk to the
Totally. And
organization.
yep, that's the thing that's gotten people to care about it from my perspective. Like, just telling them it's useless just didn't move the needle. Telling them, hey, you don't need it. They're like, it's fine. What's it cost us per month to, like essentially, whether they're in Microsoft or AWS or whatever it is, or it was just their own servers, they're just like, whatever, it doesn't cost us much to host it. It doesn't cost us much to have it there. But then when it's like, no, literally, if like there's a ton of PII in this and it's really risky, that and frankly, it's easy to convince people of the utility of that when they're reading in the newspaper constantly of all the other companies that have gone through this exact thing. It's like you're literally reading about every week another company that was breached. And for every big dramatic one, there's a lot more small ones that aren't like some sort of thing that moves the national dialogue that are just a run of the mill company and not so important stuff, but important to the people whose info was breached.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have, so it seems like they're talking about breaches more in the news, but I think that's more because of the big companies that are
Yep.
being breached and these very sophisticated breaches that are happening, where there are probably less sophisticated breaches that are happening that people aren't hearing about because these aren't really big companies. So I think it gives people a false sense of security because, just like the pipeline breach where the company paid ransom and the government was able to get their ransom back, like that doesn't happen every
No,
day.
you don't have
That
the
that doesn't
FBI
happen.
and the president commenting on your breach most of the time. You definitely do not get that benefit.
No, no, no
And
one's gonna no one's gonna break their neck. This that only happens in the movies. The FBI isn't gonna come help you get your money back or something like
no.
that. So
Although
what?
yeah, it's it just as a side note, I have to observe, it's wild how sophisticated the some of the groups that do these attacks are, and even insofar as they have like corporate websites and core values and do recruiting, and like you can like look at their websites, and obviously they operate in kind of places that aren't under the jurisdictions that the US would cover, but they behave a lot like companies, like in a weird way from a recruiting standpoint, because they need engineers and they need a bunch of people to do the stuff that they do. It's wild
Yeah, it's
how
highly
business.
sophisticated. I
Uh
think
huh.
I think we're naive to think that it's some kid in a hoodie in his parents' basement doing this stuff. Like this is,
It's like
it's an
businesses.
industry. It's an
Yeah,
industry.
these are like real businesses that, and you see the sizes, like a lot of these businesses are as big or bigger as the businesses that they're actually hacking. Like from a revenue standpoint, like if you were to look at how much revenue these folks are generating, they're like medium sized businesses often. Like they're not like, these are not like tiny little startups anymore.
Right, exactly. And it takes a and one another thing that people don't understand about breaches is that, the people that are doing these breaches, they're getting together and sort of combining this data together. So if they get bits and pieces from different places, they're actually coordinating together to like make more fulsome profiles of people.
Yep. And I mean, I feel for the insurance companies in a lot of ways because they really, like, it's a thing that you need insurance for, but it's a new enough space that, man, it is a tough thing to insure right now. And I guess, like, in a lot of ways, like, like, our software is probably as much of a friend to the insurance company as anything else because I think if we can make this as cost effective as possible, that ultimately, they make the total cost of these incidents is less, then that at least strangely helps them too.
Right, right. So if it was the world according to ID, what would be your wish for data privacy, either in technology, regulation, anywhere in the world?
Huh. That's I mean like I guess the obvious place, like the optimistic side of me was I wish the hackers wouldn't hack, and I wish like we could all just do business. Like I get the I wish this all wasn't necessary. Like as much as I'm glad to be a part of helping with it, like as much as people like, and that's a part of me that is I always need to like make sure I think about is like thinking through the downsides of this, and that's where I get the optimism of technology is always a thing that it's neutral. Like technology isn't good or bad, it just is. And then humans come along and they're going to do whatever they do with it. So I guess in a perfect world, we wouldn't need all this, but in a like magic wand world, we could neutralize this to such a degree to where it was effectively like, how do we make it where when someone's hacked, it's almost like spam today? Like where it's like, okay, someone's been hacked, but we can neutralize it immediately. There's not make the business of it disappear. Like make it so it's just not worth it to be in this business.
Yeah, I agree with that. Right. So in my view, in a way, sort of make it not, like you said, not worth it, or make the value of the data useless in a way that is just, it just wouldn't be worth it to do it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I like part of me now, when you think of like Like, I mean, spam is like, it's not hacked by any stretch, but it's a similar-ish thing, and that it's like, I'm just gonna, like, there's volume, and that people are making money off the fact that even though they're successful a tiny bit, it's enough to like make like to have a business around spamming people. And now it's just kind of a tax on existing, is that we're all just going to get the spam, and enough people are going to pull down on it to make it pay off, to where, I don't know, like, I hope we can get to a place to where the cat and mouse game of this sort of stuff ends, but I'm skeptical of that now. That's where my optimism I'm too knowledgeable.
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been great. I've been so happy to have you on the show, and I love what you guys are doing and the way that you're thinking about this problem. And I know we're going to hear lots more about you and your company, because I feel like, the end is nowhere in sight. I feel like with these types of incidents right now.
Oh, we're very much at the beginning, and it's I mean, it's an incredibly interesting space. So I would argue anyone who is thinking about getting into this sort of space, I would encourage them to do so, because it's something to feel good about, but it's also just intellectually incredibly stimulating.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, we'll definitely talk soon, and this was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Deb. This is awesome.